the anchors of the infinite. The sky was the color of a bruised plum, and the sea was a churning cauldron of salt and shadow. Luca stood on the deck of the great ecclesia, his hands white-knuckled as he gripped the railing. This was no ordinary storm. The waves didn't just break, they screamed. The ship, a magnificent flagship of cedar and gold, groaned under the weight of a tempest that felt targeted, personal, and ancient. Luca looked to the horizon, wondering if there was any harbor left in a world that seemed to have forgotten the meaning of quote, 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 quote. Suddenly, the mist parted, but it offered no relief. A swarm of enemy vessels emerged, like jagged teeth from the fog. They were smaller, faster, and bristling with malice. They didn't just fire iron cannonballs. They launched volleys of incendiary pamphlets and scrolls that hissed through the air. Where these papers landed, they burned with a strange, cold fire, trying to eat away at the ship's very foundation. Luca watched as a projectile shattered nearby, scattering pages filled with words meant to poison the resolve of the crew. At the helm stood Captain Petrus. He was a man whose face was a map of 1,000 spiritual battles, his eyes fixed firmly on the chaos ahead. He didn't flinch when the enemy ships collided with their hull, nor when the air grew thick with the smoke of 100 contradictions. "Hold fast," his voice rang out, cutting through the cacophony of the gale. "The storm is a lie, but the ship is true. We sail for the markers that never move." Through the gloom, 2 massive structures began to glow. They weren't lighthouses, but towering columns rising directly from the seabed, piercing the clouds. Luca ran to the bow, pointing. Captain Petrus joined him, his weathered face illuminated by a sudden heavenly light. The columns stood like silent sentinels, unmoved by the waves that shattered against their bases. Between them lay the only path to safety, a narrow strait of light in a sea of darkness. As the ship drew closer, the first column revealed its glory. It was the taller of the two, crafted from a material that looked like polished pearl and starlight. At its summit sat a gargantuan, radiant white host that pulsed with the rhythm of a heartbeat. Inscribed upon the pillar in letters of living fire were the words, Salus Credentium. Luca felt a wave of peace wash over him. It wasn't just bread, it was the weight of the universe held in a perfect circle, the salvation of believers. The second column was slightly smaller but no less magnificent. It was topped with a statue of a woman clothed in the sun, her mantle flowing like a river of lapis lazuli. Her eyes seemed to watch over every wave, her hands outstretched in a gesture of maternal protection. Upon this pillar were carved the words, Auxilium Christianorum. Captain Petrus knelt for a brief moment, recognizing the help of Christians. She was the star that guided the sailors when the North Star was hidden by the clouds of doubt. The enemy saw the ship's destination and redoubled their fury. A heavy blast struck the bridge, and Luca cried out as Captain Petrus fell. The young sailor rushed to his side, catching the old man before he hit the deck. The captain's breath was shallow, but his grip on Luca's hand was iron strong. "The succession must not fail," Petrus whispered, his eyes drifting toward the pillars one last time. "The ship must be moored, always, to the columns." The crew hesitated, a shadow of despair falling over the deck. But then, a new figure stepped forward from the ranks. Captain Benedetto took the wheel with a grim but certain resolve. He did not look at the sinking enemy ships or the fire on the deck. He looked only at the space between the 2 pillars. "For the captain!" he shouted, and the great ecclesia surged forward, her tattered sails catching a wind that didn't come from the storm, but from the columns themselves. The battle reached a fever pitch as the ship entered the narrow passage. Luca and Captain Benedetto worked in unison, dodging the final desperate volleys of the enemy fleet. With a rhythmic clink of heavy metal, Luca threw the great iron chains. They didn't catch on rock or sand. They wrapped securely around the 2 pillars. As the links tightened, a shockwave of silence rippled outward. The enemy ships, unable to enter the sacred space, collided with one another, and vanished into the depths. The storm vanished as quickly as it had begun. The great ecclesia rested in a sea of glass, safely anchored to the Eucharist and the Mother of God. Luca stood on the deck, breathing in the scent of incense and lilies that now filled the air. He looked at the horizon, where the sun was finally breaking through. They were safe, not because the sea was kind, but because their anchors were infinite. The battle would surely come again, but now he knew exactly where the harbor stood.